are stories, and some remain hidden. However, there are certain ghost stories that have been forgotten, and it takes ghostly phenomena to bring those stories back into the light. This is one such story in the area near the village of St. Louis, Canada. There is a mysterious phenomenon that happens there that everybody knows as the St. Louis Ghost Train. Like many villages, cities, and towns, St. Louis was a railroad community, with passenger and freight trains coming and going. The CPR was very busy, and it opened a new line to the Pacific Ocean for local industries served all over the railroads of Canada. At this time, the Canadian Pacific had bought several 460 steam locomotives. They were the most reliable, the fastest, and the most powerful locomotives ever featured on CPR at that time period. And one of them will become pretty famous. These 460s would be used on the Transcontinental Limited to Vancouver, British Columbia, or on local passenger trains or freights all over Canada. One of these 460 steam locomotives was Canadian Pacific 45 1865, otherwise known as the Ruby. She was painted in shiny black, which was the common livery of all locomotives on the Canadian Pacific at that time, and she proved to be a workhorse. The Ruby worked well, so well, that she was loved by passengers, crews, and even management. Whatever job the Ruby was given, she would pull anything with absolutely no strain whatsoever. She was even regarded as one of the fastest locomotives on the line. And she would often pull special holiday trains. But one night, things would change. On February 14th, St. Valentine's Day, 1890, the Ruby 45 1865 was pulling a packed holiday train. The train was packed with holiday vacationers returning home after a weekend at the Canadian Pacific Gateway Hotel in the snowy white mountains in the Rocky Mountains. Everyone was relaxing and having a good time. They were on their way home, and the train was running right on schedule. The headlight was shining brightly, the train was running to time, everything seemed to be in order. However, that would not be the case. Further up the line, in the town of St. Louis, a freight train was waiting on the siding to let the holiday train pass by. Passenger trains always had authority. The rear of the train was right on the switch that connected it to the main line. The crew of the freight train were in the station building having a cup of coffee, unaware of what would happen later on. They had assumed their train was fully clear of the main line, and nothing would have halted the holiday train. I am afraid to say that is not what really happened that night. One could only imagine the horror on the crew of the holiday train when they saw the caboose of the freight train right on their track in the middle of nowhere. The engineer grabbed the brakes and shut them on tightly, even putting the train in full reverse, and blew the whistle to send out a warning to everyone. But it was too late. The crash was horrific. The Ruby, pulling the holiday train, slammed into the back of the freight train, destroying the caboose and 3 boxcars. The Ruby's boiler ruptured on impact, causing a massive explosion. There was no way the crew could have survived. The coaches, which were wooden at the time, were either telescoped, obliterated, or, the worst part of it, engulfed in flames by the fire. that was caused by the explosion. Fire rapidly spread due to the wooden cars. Witnesses reported hearing screams of passengers screaming for help. But on that Valentine's Day night, 1890, very few would live to tell the tale. It took the entire night to get the blaze under control. By the next morning, 61 people were dead. The passengers and crew. The only survivor was a 12-year-old boy. He had been sitting in the rear passenger car. He had survived, but only barely. He suffered severe burns and had to be in hospital for several weeks. He would later be sent to live with his brother in the States. Nothing was left of the Ruby. She was virtually unrecognizable in the wreckage. Her crew were badly mangled, and there was pretty much nothing left of the holiday train. It took them an entire week to clean up the mess, an entire 2 weeks to get the rails back online. But the inquiry had already taken place by that point. In the investigation following the crash, it was revealed that the crew of the freight train had misjudged their track, as in where they had been. They thought the entire train was off the main line, but a good portion was still left on the track, and the engine of the freight train, that is, had to move a few more ways to actually get the full train in, but they had misjudged the length of the freight train, and so the crew had left the engine cab without knowing the consequences of their misdeed. By the speed of the train, there was no way that the 1865 would be able to stop in time. However, new revelations came into light regarding the engine herself. It was reported that the 1865, the Ruby, had suffered minor issues with her brakes, as is they would not work properly at times, but it happened so rarely that no one thought to even bring it up to management. She had worked so well. I guess this was a case of wrong place, wrong time. And when the brakes were needed most, they were delayed, resulting in the horrific crash. Scrutiny also came upon the owned coaches, which had fully been engulfed in flames by the crash. After the crash, new laws were put in place to make sure nothing like the crash at St. Louis would ever happen again in the fiery inferno. It was revealed that multiple passengers had survived the initial crash, but died in the flames, leaving the boy as the only survivor of the crash. The remains of the engine and coaches were scrapped, and the accident was quickly forgotten. Starting in the 1920s, over 40 years after the crash, many reports said that near St. Louis, a light would be seen where tracks had not been. The tracks had well been taken out by the time of this happening, but it was odd. You would see headlights, then you would see a mysterious light before vanishing into the darkness. This is where the St. Louis ghost train was born. For years, many Canadians have reported seeing the ghostly phantom that is the ghost light of St. Louis. But no one knows what the light was. No one knows what the collection of the light has to this Valentine's Day 1890 crash that ended so many innocent lives. No one knew of the Ruby. Claims continue that if you go out there at that section of St. Louis, you'll see a ghostly apparition of a 460 locomotive with the number 1865 and nameplates reading Ruby on her sides, rolling down the track where there are no tracks, pulling a long line of coaches before disappearing, sometimes in the form of a massive explosion. And so, I must end this story by warning you. If you go out to St. Louis, Canada on a cold night, Valentine's Day, you might see the ghost train of St. Louis.